What's up guys, BonsaiLad here. Today, in part 2 of our EHP guide series, we're going to be delving deeper into module design and how to effectively kit your build so you can advance faster into the late game stages and not get left behind. Now to start out, I know that there are many different build types out there, and I still do have a lot to learn about hybrid and pure damage. And to that end, I don't want to teach something that I don't fully understand myself or give well-intentioned bad advice out. So we are going to stick specifically to what we know. And for today's guide, that's going to be talking modules from the good old reliable EHP perspective. Now this video is going to be a continuation to part 1 of the guide series I released earlier, in which we're going to talk about modules and their specific subsets that you will use throughout the various stages of the game. And not just which ones you want to use, but also how to think through the design process yourself and come to the ideal solution for your own unique build and situation, because modules ultimately are just tools that you use to solve problems that you're dealing with, not an end to themselves. And in the event that you are brutally betrayed by the infamous FUD's casino, as many players are, it is very important that you know how to work around not having everything that you want to have, and knowing how to turn what you do have into a properly functioning build. And to that end, let's get started. Now to start out, as you probably know, modules are divided into 4 categories that will bolster your health, damage, econ, and ultimate weapon damage. But beyond that, these categories are further split into subcategories of purpose for CC, EHP, damage, econ, and gambling or casino power. And on each of those modules, they also have 4 to 8 substats depending on rarity and level that will also be split into these subcategories as well. This allows modules and substats to be mixed and matched between different builds to accomplish different purposes, especially when it comes to core substats, as they can be used to temporarily buff ultimate weapon statistics without having to use stones. This allows players to hit strategic advancements and breakpoints when otherwise they would not be able to afford them. Now the first half of this video is going to be explaining what the modules and their substats are, then we will explain the thought process and how to use them to craft builds to accomplish the specific tasks you need them to do. So let's get started. Now the first thought we're looking at is going to be cannons. Now at face value you would assume that this isn't a very important slot because cannons are damage and whatnot. However, cannons do play a role in health builds. What we want to do with this category and every following one is divide our modules and substats into what they do, and then pull from those categories specific assets to enhance the stats we need to make our builds work. Now we're going to mention the 3 that have no purpose for health builds: Amplifying Strike, Havoc Bringer, and Being Annihilator. Now these cannons are pure damage, they have no CC, no econ, no EHP benefits, and we simply leave them out of most builds. Now, Death Penalty. This one is casino power. It allows you to gamble for an insta-kill on high-value targets like fleets or bosses, as well as trimming a decent chunk of the basic type enemies as well. Technically, this is considered percent damage because it deals 100% of enemy damage to 50% of enemies, but it is primarily a casino module. Shrink Ray reduces enemy mass, which directly increases knockback effectiveness, essentially amplifying your crowd control potential and increasing the time it takes for enemies to reach your tower, therefore spreading out the damage taken. This is a CC module. And then Astral Deliverance. This one is technically better than nothing because it does buff bounce shot by a very marginal amount, but it is a very minor boost to crowd control and basically better than not having one, but nothing more. You may also notice that all relevant modules are tied to a tenet of EHP from the list in the first video, part 1 overall build strategy. Shameless plug, I did decide to make this whole thing a series where the first video was general strategy and subsequent ones are deep dives on specific topics, such as modules. If you haven't checked it out, please do, it's pretty cool, and we're just going to keep making it better every time. Now, unlike the 3 cannons that we may wish to use, when it comes to substats we have a lot more options to choose from. However, they also fall into 2 distinct categories: more damage and more projectiles. The singular exception here, of course, is range, and when it comes to this, you either need range or you don't want it, and you have a range card and lab to play with to achieve whatever value you need. So unless you're going over 200 meters, the stat is to be taken completely at your own discretion. For the remaining stats, damage will not help us because we have no damage to multiply, so these stats are basically blank. More bullets, however, does something because bullets are imbued with the power of knockback, and having more of them means we have more knockback. So even though there are many different options in this category, it comes down to a binary choice of more knockback or no knockback. When you put it together, when choosing a cannon, The only question you need to ask yourself is, do I want more knockback, or will it hurt me? And then, do I want to kill things quickly with the power of gambling? Now, when it comes to tournaments and milestones, the answer is almost always going to be yes, because econ is irrelevant and survivability is all that really matters in this case. Being able to push enemies back to gain more hits or potentially negate their attacks altogether with casino power is a solid plus. When it comes to farming, however, we want things to die as quickly as possible, but while being in the eco trio sync, especially in the mid to late game with the Golden Tower combo if that's something that we're using. So in that situation, knockback might be a negative unless it's essential to survivability. Sometimes without knockback, you will die thousands of waves earlier from shotguns, but other times it makes no difference to your build, your wave counts, whether it's there or not, but throwing it on will lose you a decent chunk of your econ because things will die slower and then be pushed out of combos. Now this isn't something that I can tell you that you need or not, this is something that you have to test in your own build with trial and error to determine what specifically you need for where you are and what you're doing. The goal is, you obviously want as much power as you possibly can without compromising the purpose of your build, which in farming's case is going to be generating coins as efficiently as possible. So if you want knockback, pick stats that give knockback. If you don't, pick stats that don't, or leave the slot entirely blank, because damage is, after all, optional, especially to us. Moving on to generators. Just like cannons, not all of them are useful. Project funding, I'm sorry, but you have no purpose here, so we're going to set you off to the side. The remaining 5 generators all have specific uses. Now, BHT is a pure econ one. It gives you extra coins for your free up stats. It's a solid farming staple. Pulsar Harvester reduces enemy levels to an extent, which is a partial damage reduction. G-Comp, all hail the mighty compressor. J-Plays veterans know what I'm talking about. Reduce the cooldown of non-swamp ultimate weapons. This one can be used for econ with the trio, crowd control and damage reduction with Black Hole, and health with Deathwave Health, essentially functioning as a jack-of-all-trades module. Decent in everything, great in nothing. Singularity Harness, this increases bot range, so we end up with a larger golden bot for econ or a larger flame bot for damage reduction. And lastly, Restorative Bonus, which increases attack speed, therefore projectiles, therefore knockback. So it's a CC module. Now when it comes to the substats, there are technically 3 different categories that they can fall into: econ, power, and waste, or garbage. Some of these stats also have footnotes as to when they are useful, when they are pointless, specific situations when they are good, and just keep this in mind when you're designing a setup for yourself. Now putting this together, unlike with cannons, all generators will have a purpose. We are essentially deciding between economy and EHP power, and once again, we'll typically have 2 different thought styles between farmings and milestones and tournaments. When it comes to farming, the question you want to ask is how to get the maximum coin value without compromising survivability. In many later stage farm runs, permanent black hole is essential to cash in on the Primsy damage reduction. In addition, maintaining a permanent golden tower and sustained death wave to boost your economy is also very important. However, without sufficiently developed stats, you'll be unable to do so without the assistance of an NVN or a G-Comp, with these modules essentially filling a hole in your build that you otherwise would not be able to cover. However, once the stats are developed, you can forgo G-Comp or NVN and instead run a BHD for higher coin gain, and then after assists, Singularity Harness as well, to actively increase coin gain instead of just manipulating cooldowns to make it kind of work, essentially maximizing coins without compromising anything critical. Tournaments, on the other hand, do not care about economy and want pure raw EHP power and survivability, and just like farming, the permanent black hole, as well as the chronofield and eventually swamp, are extremely important. Many early builds will again utilize G-Comp to fill gaps and allow the permanent black hole for Primsy damage reduction, among other things. Once you improve your stats, usually NVN and then G-Comp also becomes redundant. You can then focus on power modules such as Restorative Bonus for increased knockback or Pulsar Harvester for level and damage reductions. Once again, the goal is applying maximum power possible while not compromising survivability. And once support mods are no longer needed, they are replaced with mods that add active value to econ and power. The substats also fall into similar categories, with a few notable ones that are especially effective with certain modules, under certain conditions, bad under others. You want to, again, match substats with mods for maximum effectiveness and get away with as much as you can without critically damaging your setup. Just pay attention to that when you're going over your builds later. You'll notice there is, of course, a third category called waste. These substats do nothing for EHP. They do have value, just not for us and what we're doing. Moving on to number 3, armor. Now these modules are often at the core of most EHP builds, as they'll be one of the largest sources of power that we can attain, especially with the addition of assist mods. As with the previous two categories, there are of course armors that do not serve many purposes for us: ACP, pure damage mod, doesn't help the EHP cause, and wormhole redirector. Though technically it is a very good early module, once you attain the wall, it becomes completely useless. So before you have the wall, it's great to use because it helps with your regen, but after you get the wall, never put it back on. Now this leaves 4 remaining armors of value. Sharp Fortitude is a pure EHP buff that massively increases health and regen. This should kind of echo back to the first 2 tenets of EHP. A massive bonus to wall survivability, as well as a consecutive thorn hit bonus, which does trim thorn hits to kill to an extent. Orbital Augment is a solid % health damage source that significantly weakens elites, fleets, bosses as well, and all the generic enemies, including ultimates. This results in less thorn hits to kill and stacks very nicely with the Sharp Fortitude bonus when using assist modules later. Space Displacer is a decent crowd control mechanic that generates a significant amount of inner landmines capable of stunning anything. However, this module does need to have a good % damage source behind it to be viable, as stunned enemies will still have to be dealt with at some point, since we're not just stalling them until damage can finish them off. And lastly, Negative Mass Projector. It sounds a lot better than it is, but aside from Rays, Scatter Primes, and sometimes the boss, it will never reach full value, because very few things will stick around to get hit 20 times with orbs without dying, to fully cash in on its damage reduction and slow. It is, however, technically better than not having an armor, so use it if there's nothing else, I would say. When it comes to the substats, there are 4 distinct categories, not including waste, that they can fall into: EHP, crowd control, % damage, and casino power. These stats will either add to your health and regen, deal % damage, slower stun enemies, or allow you to play harder in the casino. Wasted stats are of course wasted stats that have no value for EHP builds. A quick point of note before moving on: Death Defy is classified as casino power, as it is literally gambling to save your life. Now this stat becomes much more useful in the late to end game when you have a crowd control focus that can gain you several hundred if not thousands of waves in tournament through luck, but in the early to mid game it is pretty useless, as once your wall breaks and you are able to Death Defy, you usually end up being defeated seconds later, so it's not very impactful at that point. When designing an armor setup, the important question to ask is, where is my EHP weakest? This module category has everything in it from the EHP tenets. So you can use Sharp Fortitude to gain health and regeneration, you can use OA for % damage sources, you can use Space Displacer for more crowd control with inner landmines, and yes, technically you can use Negative Mass Projector for damage reduction, even if it's not that good. As mentioned in the comprehensive EHP guide, it is typically recommended to get this assist slot first when you are able to clear that milestone, so that you can pair 2 of these together to make powerful combinations. Generally speaking, SF/OA is considered the best option in most competitive builds. Now when it comes to substats, you have the same decisions to make. Typically regeneration, defense, and wall health are highly recommended in the beginning. However, once you delve deep into crowd control mechanics, the CC stats begin to take precedence, such as throwing Shockwave Frequency on both mods to drop it to a 7-second cooldown, among other things. Eventually, as enemy health scaling increases, many people will throw on the orb stats in combination with CF Plus to fully negate the presence of bosses in a run. Every situation will, however, be unique, and working backwards from where your problems are to find solutions is one of the best ways to determine what you need. And lastly, as always, don't use wasted stats, as they will not help you. Finally, we move on to cores, and as always, we're going to put aside the glass cannon staples, Dimension Core, and Omchimp, as damage is optional and not a part of our story today. This leaves 3.5 modules that are worth using. And yes, Magnetic Hook is half of a module. Technically, it is a weak crowd control source that uses mines to sometimes stun the boss and some elites. But ultimately, it's like Negative Mass Projector. It's technically better than nothing, but not much more than that. Now when it comes to the valuable ones that we want to use, we have Multiverse Nexus. This is a massive economy boost that automatically syncs the Golden Trio, and when upgraded can reduce their cooldowns to below 50 seconds. This module is often paired with G-Comp in the earlier stages until it is rendered obsolete by developed UW stats. Harmony Conductor. This one gives a 30% mischance, 15% for boss, for all enemies in a poison swamp. And it just so happens that a single swamp can fully wrap around the entire wall and potentially debuff everything except ranged and ray. And then once you upgrade the lab, it tags those as well. Lastly, Prim C is one of the easiest and most powerful forms of damage reduction you can get your hands on early. It is an 80% drop to all damage forms within Black Hole, which can grow to cover the entire screen. And it also offers a free extra Black Hole, which allows complete coverage of the entire wall with much less stone investment. It's also a staple of late game EHP as well. Moving on to core substats. These little guys are special because unlike the other ones, they represent saved stones that you do not have to immediately spend. They are still going to be split into several categories, but acquiring these stats means that you have to spend less of your hard to come by power stones to attain critical breakpoints and results, especially earlier in the games. Some of the most common examples are Chronofield Duration plus 10 seconds can save you thousands of stones on permanent Chronofield. Black Hole Duration and Cooldown can generate 8 seconds towards permanent Black Hole, which is again thousands of stones, or Deathwave Quantity. This can double the effectiveness of Deathwave health on shorter milestone runs or tournaments, allowing stronger EHP faster. These substats are especially powerful and should always be chosen intentionally. Like all other substats, however, these will still be split into groups. You have your Econ, percent damage, and crowd control, as well as always waste. When choosing substats, you want to try to patch the holes that you have so stones can be spent elsewhere, whether that be permanent Chronofield, Deathwave health, driving cooldowns down with NVN, or whatever else is needed for your specific build. Now that we've gone over all of that, it's time to design your module setup. Now, depending on where you are in the game, you will have different modules, lack modules you want to have, and need different things from them, which is why no singular guide will ever be sufficient to tell you the perfect setup for your unique tower situation. Although there is typically an ideal setup for late game builds where you have everything you need in mods, stones, and labs, the journey of getting there will require changing modules and subsets periodically as your tower grows. And to help you figure out what you need at a given time, I've got a few questions and steps for you to go through. Before we begin though, one thing that you may have noticed is that most of the previous and many of the following examples are going to be high-level ancestral modules and substats, and that is simply because, in addition to it being what I have to work with, the higher level components are more impactful and easier to demonstrate the changes in build performance when they are swapped around. But what if your tower doesn't look like mine? What if it looks more like this, or maybe something in between? Well, it doesn't actually matter. The principles will be the same regardless of where you are in your build progress, progression, and what modules you have. The idea is to take what you do have and make the best possible decisions that you can with the tools that you already have. And depending on what those tools are, it may or may not be ideal, but it will be the best you can do until you grow and attain new tools to work with. The only thing to keep in mind is that some subsets cannot be rolled without specific rarities in your modules. Here's a chart. You can find this in many places, and it tells you, for example, that you can't get more orbs unless you have a mythic module, and you can't get more GT duration unless you have at least a legendary module. Be sure to reference this before you waste all of your shards on a stat that you cannot attain because of rarity. And with that being said, let's begin. First, identify where your build is weak and choose the best module and substats that you have to assist with your current problem. In the event that you are brutally betrayed by the infamous FUD's Casino and are unable to pick the perfect module, you want to go for the next best option you have. Now sometimes that means putting on a useless module that could roll a higher rarity substat like Dabs or Defense in the beginning, and sometimes that means putting on an epic SF whose unique effect and Thorns buff is more helpful than a mythic ACP with better defense percent in a Thorns BC, because every build is different and every problem requires a different solution. Considering there are different needs for farming, short-term milestone, long-term milestone, and tournament means that it is not impossible for you to have 4 different sets of module design, depending on what you're trying to do. And this is okay. You don't have to just have one set for farm and one set for tournament. Consider what would be beneficial for the current goal, and even if it's wildly different than something else you normally use, give it a try and go for it. If it works, keep it. If it doesn't, try something else. One example I particularly enjoyed using was Pulsar Harvester to get assist mods. If I remember correctly, this was before Prim C released, and I was able to make all of the enemies in all 40 waves have the stats of Wave 1. due to the level reduction mechanic. So once I was able to tank damage on wave 1, the whole thing was smooth sailing. Another example from our very own Tequila, he decided that he wanted to fully invest into the Flame Bot for maximum power, and after doing so, he doubled his sell income, gained thousands of waves in farming, as well as stability in Legends. However, this came with a 50% econ penalty. Now the Flamebot power and regeneration masteries he attained were sufficient to unlock assist mods, at which point he grabbed the epic level armor and generator. Now throwing in a singularity harness, he fully recovered his econ, as shown in the graph, and by putting in an epic OA, he also improved his tournament performance, with the 2 electrons reducing thorn hits to kill on everything, especially bosses and scatters. Now this is a great example of implementing meta strategy, as seen in Giga and Varsity's video, and then going back and using module design to supplement any weaknesses you generate while trading for strength. Point number 2. Determine what type of substats would be most beneficial for the modules you have to work with, but more importantly, most beneficial to your build as a whole. Essentially, try to remember that substats can be synergized with modules to make them more efficient. When using Shrink Ray, for example, you almost always want maximum knockback with more projectiles, and when using BHD, you typically want to have all 3 free-up stats to make its bonus more effective for economy. But beyond just synergizing with modules, sometimes you can equip substats that directly improve your build, even if they don't make sense specifically for the module that they are on. My most recent example being using my substats to permanently free myself of Galaxy Compressor in farming. Because I use NVN, all of the cooldown stats on my Prim C were enough to bring my synced cooldown below the cooldown of my black hole, without even maxing the black hole duration stone stat. I essentially saved 2,000 stones on it that I won't have to pay till later, and I get to run BHD and SH at the same time for a massive coin gain. All of this while not compromising my build at all. Another good example that I unfortunately don't have footage from was last year when I was just getting into Legends as a hybrid player and pushing towards keys. I realized that I was dying from not having enough health because my death wave could not stack to the maximum 12.5x multiplier in only a few hundred waves. My solution for this problem was to equip death wave quantity on my dimension core that I was using for damage, and as a result the death wave health stacked twice as fast. I immediately gained 1 to 200 waves and was in Legends permanently. As I continued to rise, eventually I was hitting over 600 and easily hitting the death wave max well before then, but was losing permanent black hole from the UW battle condition. At that time, in order to counter this, I re-rolled death wave quantity, which was no longer needed, for black hole duration, which added 4 seconds onto the G-comp pile and pushed the wave I was losing black hole from 600 to 900, and immediately gained a few hundred waves on those brutal tournaments as a result. Another point to remember from earlier, when it comes to the later stages of the game, you actually do switch a little bit away from EHP priority onto more crowd control focus. Still EHP, but with a little bit of CC mixed in as well. If you're doing CC focused builds, you will obviously do this substantially earlier, but at this point in particular, the substats on our armor reflect more orbs, shockwave, knockback stats to leverage the CF Plus to further push enemies away at the sacrifice of pure EHP statistics as reflected here. To bring it home, we don't always want to follow the meta template of orthodoxy when there's a cheeky creative solution that doesn't even cost stones to pull off. Always assess your individual build to determine where the weaknesses are and what you can do to counter them. Point 3. When choosing substats on your core, reference ultimate weapons to defer stone expenses. As mentioned earlier, core substats are special because they are stones deferred. You can use these to buff your ultimate weapon statistics temporarily without having to pay the stone cost to do so normally. One of the most famous examples here is the chronofield duration or cooldown. Higher level players will typically have at least one of these to boost their chronofield to 70 seconds from the maximum of 60 that you typically want with labs and stones, and not have to waste over 2,000 stones over stoning. And will not have to spend over 2,000 stones to counter the ultimate weapon battle condition. However, newer players who happen to have an ancestral core that is viable to use can also get both of these subs to have a permanent chronofield pre-BC with only 40 seconds of investment, 30 of which is done in the lab. This allows you to not spend thousands of stones there, and instead spend them elsewhere, like masteries or cooldowns, for a much earlier power spike while still maintaining a critical crowd control mechanic. Another example is once assists are in play, you can get a permanent black hole with a 50% core efficiency and substats to be free of both Galaxy Compressor and Multiverse Nexus forever, allowing more power or economy modules in their place. Another good example is Poison Swamp. You can actually bypass 4 clicks of cooldown and duration for a single permanent swap to save hundreds of stones, or for the second permanent swap for over 1,000 stones, just with the 2 module substats. Or consider the Golden Tower. As you work on your Golden combo, if you take the Econ path, you're going to need a higher and higher duration and a permanent GT ideally. In this setup, J-Weiss was able to not spend 7,500 stones on Golden Tower duration by leveraging his substats efficiently. Yes, there's a lot of stones in the core efficiency there, but that's useful for any mod that he uses, and it's still cheaper than paying for GT duration normally. The options are truly endless. Now obviously at some point you will still want to get those stone upgrades to use your substats in a more efficient way, but before you reach the late game stage, you can use them to temporarily skip massive investments you otherwise would be forced to make. And lastly, remember, the correct modules and module subsets to use are whatever will help your build as a whole the most, even if it's not the most commonly accepted best choice. Now before we wrap this guide up for modules, it was requested enough that I am going to give a quick tour of exactly what I'm running and why I'm running it as well. So essentially, I have 2 different sets, a farming set and a tournament/short milestone set, as the only milestones I have left to run are in tier 19+ and are particularly brutal. Now starting with my farming setup here, you may notice that I am running with Amplifying Strike, one of the modules that does nothing. This is because I specifically want it to do nothing. As with my specific build, knockback is detrimental to my coin efficiency. It is true that I could run without a cannon set entirely, however my OCD mind could not handle that level of imbalance. As always, we are running with Sharp Fortitude for maximum EHP power and Orbital Augment for percent damage. You'll notice that these stats are fully focused on EHP with minimal crowd control aspects, aside from orbs. This is because my crowd control power is fairly weak, and I could not properly utilize all the things I need to justify the CC substats. Generators are BHD and Singularity Harness for maximum coin efficiency because I prioritize Econ over survivability, and lastly, running NVN and Prim C for cores. You'll notice there's a lot of cooldown stats on the cores. This gets my NVN sync to 47 seconds. This way my 36-second black hole will still hit 48 and be permanent in farming with the perk, and I don't even have to spend the last 2,000 stones for the final 2 seconds of black hole duration. I've essentially borrowed 2,000 stones from the ether to make my farming setup function properly and freed myself from G-Comp. This is the power of choosing your substats wisely. You'll notice that there are some inefficiencies on several of my modules, but I'm waiting for the 201 level to re-roll on those. We're going to be doing a lot of things, including getting a permanent native black hole without NVN, but considering I lack the stones to get 50% core sub efficiency, we can put a pause on it for now. The rest of the changes will be secret and revealed in the Tour of My Tower video that should be coming out in the near future, with the newly rolled 201 stats, assuming I have enough rerolls to pull it off. But then again, the FUD's casino is notoriously brutal, so you never know. Moving on to the tournament/short milestone setup. It's very similar to farming, however you'll notice that we have swapped death penalty for casinoing and a sad little shrink ray, both kitted for maximum knockback and projectiles. When I don't care about the coins, the knockback is helpful. In addition, this is the one and only shrink ray I have ever gotten, and my cannon assist is also only epic, so there's no need to invest more at this point. You'll also notice that G-Comp has been slotted in with Pulsar Harvester. This allows me to maintain my permanent black hole with substat assists while dropping NVN in favor of Harmony Conductor for the 30% miss chance in Swamp. Pulsar Harvester also drops a significant amount of enemy damage, pushing just that much further in tournaments and the shorter runs. You'll also notice that HC has Swamp stats on it, and this allows me to save 670 stones while making one Swamp permanent, and will allow me to save over 1,000 stones when making the second one permanent. Once I'm able to hit level 201 in the next week or so, A lot of these will be re-rolled for late game efficiency. Those are all going to be secrets as well. Reveal them to my tower video. But that's pretty much it. Basic farming and tournament setups for me. At this point, that's pretty much all we have for today. I know there wasn't a whole lot of specifics on which specific module you want to use at certain times, but that is kind of the point. The needs of your build will be constantly evolving and changing as your tower grows, and learning how to think through your options and figure out which set works best is a good skill to have. If you're ever unsure in one of your decisions, ask yourself what purpose does this component serve, and then make sure the answer also makes sense. If you get really stuck, feel free to stop by the Discord server and reach out. In addition to the EHP council members popping in throughout the day, we also have several mentors who also know the ways of EHP, and some who know the ways of the Canon of Glass. They can help you walk through any confusion you have, regardless of how you want to run your build. Anyway, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this guide as a continuation of the first one. If you haven't seen it yet, feel free to check it out, and if you did enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really does help with the algorithm and getting my content out there for more people to see. I want to thank everyone for the support they've shown thus far, and to wish you all the best of luck on your tower journeys. This is BonsaiLad signing out, and always remember, damage is optional, but the wall is still forever.